When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
Behind those cozy nights at home, thousands of employees at BP go to work every day. People producing more U.S. natural gas. People building grid-scale solar capacity. People turning landfill waste gas into pipeline-quality renewable natural gas. And people delivering all of that power where it's needed. They're part of the more than 300,000 jobs BP supports across the country. Learn more at bp.com/investing in America.
Slow Burn Media, Evergreen Podcasts, and Killer Podcasts presents Who Killed, a podcast that provides a voice for the voiceless. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Who Killed. I am your host, Bill Huffman, and this is a Slow Burn Media, Evergreen Podcasts, and Killer Podcast production. I may sound a little different this week because I have once again caught COVID. It is a good reminder to everyone out there that COVID is still a thing and it still can mess with you. I have had COVID brain most of the week, as well as a raspy voice and exhaustion. So everybody out there, make sure you're taking your meds or whatever you're doing to stay in shape, taking your vitamins. I don't know where I caught it, but I did, and it is what it is. But that won't stop me from telling you about this week's story, because it came to me through a conversation that I had with my mom about a distant relative who was murdered in northern Michigan. And this is the same area of Michigan that we vacation every summer. And that would be up near Traverse City, the M22 area. And it is one of the most beautiful areas in all of the United States. So the story involves a disgruntled mill owner and an undersheriff named Neil Marshall and one Dr. Frank E. Thurber. My mother is a Thurber, and so we have connections to the Thurber family line. And there may be one Thurber that you may know of, and that would be James Thurber, who was a famous satirist and humorist back in the early 20th century for The New Yorker. He wrote cartoons, short stories, some novels, and he was an interesting character and definitely worth a read if you ever get the chance. But this story, again, involves one Frank Thurber. And it goes like this. On August 11th, 1889, a telegram arrived in all the major newspapers across the state of Michigan. And it read, 2 men murdered. A tragedy occurred in Otter Creek, 20 miles north of Frankfort, on the evening of August 10th. Charles T. Wright, president of the Otter Creek Lumber Company of Racine, Wisconsin, shot and instantly killed Undersheriff Neil Marshall and Dr. Frank E. Thurber. C.T. Wright had not paid his taxes on his mill property at the Arrow Lake Township in several years and had a suit with the township. About 3 weeks prior, the sheriff attached a large lot of logs, some of which Wright had tried to retrieve but could not get to, and they laid idle as his men wanted them to be cut. It is believed that Wright, with a force of men, attempted to gain possession, And in this melee, Supervisor Thurber was killed first and Marshall soon after. Sheriff Marshall was an old settler in the region and brother-in-law to Lewis Sands, the millionaire lumberman of Manistee. He left behind a large family. Now, Dr. Thurber was a very cultured gentleman who moved to the area the previous fall from Holland, Ottawa County. He leaves behind a young wife and child. He is well known throughout the United States, having traveled for years with Dr. O'Leary and his lecture tours. Wright has been in business at Errol for 8 years, and his crime has really surprised everyone. So my primary resources for this story were the articles published between 1890 and 1905, and also Larry Wakefield's 4-part series about the case in the 1976 Traverse City Eagle Record. During my research, I realized I owned one of his books that I had picked up in Traverse City when I was a kid. Wakefield was a local author and published many books about northern Michigan that can still be bought today. Needless to say, when my mom casually dropped the fact that a distant relative had been murdered, I was slightly in shock. Not so much that this could happen, but the fact that my mom held on to this information or didn't find it pertinent considering my profession. However, once I got over the missed opportunity, I started my own digging. And here is what I found. Again, you may be surprised to hear things haven't changed much when it comes to people with money getting their way. So the Otter Creek Mill was a tinderbox of tension in the simmering heat of early August. Whispers of unrest stirred the air, fueled by a tax dispute that threatened to ignite into conflict. Charlie Wright, the mill owner, stood defiant against the law, his refusal to pay taxes, a spark in the parched prairie of order. The stage was set on that sweltering Saturday in 1889 as Deputy Sheriff Neil Marshall, a colossus of justice in Benzie County, confronted the gathered lumberjacks with the authority of the law. His towering presence was a bastion of the community's trust. His mission clear: to claim the logs in the name of the law. The lumberjacks perched atop their wooden fortress cast wary glances at the deputy, his warning of arrest hanging heavy in the stifling air. Their eyes then shifted to C.T. Wright, the mill owner whose stature was as formidable as his reputation. Seated casually, yet commandingly, on a log, his hunting rifle an unspoken threat, Wright was the embodiment of rugged defiance. His earlier caution to the deputy was a chilling prelude to the standoff that unfolded. The deputy's resolve did not waver as the logs tumbled down, though he prudently sidestepped the cascading timber. His hand never strayed to the pistol at his hip, a testament to his restraint in the face of provocation. The silent exchange of gazes between Wright and Marshall was a chance of wills, each man unyielding, their standoff a microcosm of the larger struggle between individual obstinacy and collective governance. Ultimately, the deputy's withdrawal was not a surrender, but a strategic retreat, a pause in the relentless march of law and order that would inevitably resume. The tale of Otter Creek Mill was one of many threads in the rich tapestry of American frontier history, a narrative of conflict and resolution woven into the nation's enduring legacy. I can thank my researcher for that little itty-bitty titty. The tale of Marshall and the town of Errol is a poignant reminder of what human endeavors and the relentless march of time. As Marshall faced his final moments, unbeknownst to him, the narrative of Errol and its inhabitants continued to unfold, steeped in the complexities of political maneuvering and the harsh realities of frontier life. So the Sawmill Creek at Otter Creek was extremely important to Errol. It was during a very booming industry time of the lumber industry, and C.T. Wright was a man of experience. He had resilience. He had managed the mill with a deft hand, and he always ensured the production of essential materials. And he was part of this very rapidly modernizing world. His mill was involved in the production of shingle bolts, fence posts, railroad ties, and hardwood. So clearly he was vital for the economy of the town and the community. So he probably employed most people that lived there. So the tale of C.T. Wright unfolds, unfortunately, like one of those classic American frontier dramas, where the rugged individual spirit and individual entrepreneurial blah, blah, blah clash, and you end up having a existential crisis. You know, Wright was a man of contrasts. He was both admired but also feared. His character was one of loyalty and leadership, but he also had violent outbursts and a dark side, which, of course, you cannot ignore when looking back on historical events such as this. Now, his legal entanglements that brought him into this situation were basically the fact that he didn't want to pay his taxes. Sounds familiar, right? His battle with the county over taxation issues highlighted the challenges faced by early business owners in navigating the intricate tax laws of the time. And I won't argue with that. I think that would definitely be hard to do, especially with the changing of the whole tax industry. And I don't believe, the income tax thing didn't even become a thing until later. So needless to say, he owed taxes. He didn't want to pay them. It's, again, one of those things you can see happen all the time. It happens every day here in the United States of America. I mean, that's why we have the IRS. So, again, we have a undersheriff, Neil Marshall, who's going in and trying to get this guy to pay up. He brings along Dr. Thurber. So, these aren't two guys. It's not True Detective. They're not out there going to take down the Yellow King and save a bunch of children or anything like that. These are two very respected, as I mentioned earlier, cultured gentlemen of the late 1890s. And Thurber, being famous for traveling with Dr. O'Leary, made him stand out for sure. So, again, this situation that we have here is one of David basically versus Goliath, even though there are two Davids in this situation. But the story reaches its climax on that fateful August day. And that's basically when Wright snapped. And like I mentioned before, and I've mentioned this a lot in discussions about the Richard Allen case in Delphi, about what happens if people don't have any record of violence in their past. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't anything there. It just may be that there isn't any record. It may be as simple as that. And in Richard Allen's case, he may have just saw a crime of opportunity and snapped. That's the only thing I'm going to talk about with Delphi, other than the fact that I do believe that the jury got it right. I do believe that people snap all the time, and you don't necessarily have to have a great reason for it. I do feel like there are a number of people out there that are trying to sow confusion and put out misinformation about the case and say that, he didn't get a fair trial, and this, that, and the other. Again, the jury had all the time to discuss all of the stuff that was presented. I understand there is a conspiracy aspect to this case, but we aren't going to entertain that because it's ridiculous. Richard Allen is convicted. He will find out his fate on December 2nd, or around there, I believe. So, apologize for the tangent, but I had to at least put my 2 cents in there because that was a discussion on social media over the last week. Oh, by the way, PSA for you. X, currently, or formerly known as Twitter, they changed their terms of service, and that happened last Friday. And you know what it did? It led everybody to this new, incredible, well, it's not new because it's been around for a while, but it's now actually practical because everybody's gone there, and that's Blue Sky. And let's just think for a second about that. A guy buys a company for $44 billion and turns it into a Nazi hate machine. Well, when the terms of service turn around and say, well, now you can use your information, X can use your information to train their AI to be better at who knows what. Yeah, that gave everybody pause, especially the creators that I know, people that work in news, people that work in sports, people that work in true crime and podcasting. It was a mass exodus, and I couldn't be happier to be over at Blue Sky. And you can find me if you just look up Bill Huffman or Who Killed, it will come up. And again, that's a major tangent, and I know that was a tangent, but again, I had to get it off my chest because it's just really been front and center all this past week. So, as I mentioned before, the lumber industry in northern Michigan in the 1890s was really a remarkable period of growth and productivity. This era was characterized by the dominance of what is known as white pine, and that is the most sought-after wood for construction, or it was at the time. And Michigan's vast forests and network of rivers really helped facilitate the transportation of logs to mills and to ports. So this was basically a prime location for lumbering. And by the late 19th century, Michigan had become the leading lumber producer in the United States, a title it held for nearly 3 decades. So the industry was not only a driver of economic growth, but it also led to the settlement and development of the state's northern regions. However, this boom was short-lived, and by 1890, the once abundant forests were largely depleted, leading to a decline in the industry. The lumber era in Michigan is a testament to the state's rich natural resources and the transient nature of resource-based industries. Having vacationed there, having been there tons of times, you can still see the scars. I mean, there are areas where they built a golf course in the 1920s with the hopes of it becoming the, Florida of the North, but Florida didn't exist at that time. So I guess whatever would apply back then. And, the golf course, I don't think was ever completed, but where they cut the trees down, you can still see it from the satellite on Google Maps. It's pretty incredible. So, again, that was the part 1 of Larry Wakefield's series of the Otter Creek murders. And part 2 is, a little bit more detailed about the actual lead up to this incident. And the confrontation at the mill was not just a matter of law enforcement. It was actually a clash of wills. It was a test of community bonds and a stark illustration of the challenges faced by those who sought to uphold the law in a time when personal reputation and loyalty often trumped legal authority. So Deputy Marshall, aware of the delicate balance between these two things, wisely chose to retreat in the face of overwhelming opposition. Now, recognizing the lumberjacks' loyalty to Wright was unshakable, his decision to seek reinforcements was not only prudent but necessary, especially in the environment of the milling community. The encounter with Dr. Thurber at Bancroft's store marked a pivotal moment in Marshall's quest for support. Despite Thurber's unassuming stature, his influence and respect within the community were undeniable. His multifaceted role as a physician, educator, and supervisor made him a pillar of the community, and his endorsement of Marshall's cause could sway public opinion in the favor of the law. The naming of Errol, a decision that showcased Thurber's thoughtful and deliberate nature, reflected his deep connection to the community and his desire to leave a lasting imprint on the region. As Marshall and Thurber deliberated their next move, the strategy they devised was actually similar to what I just talked about, True Detective. So they planned their approach to the mill at an unexpected angle, and they were targeting the head sawyer. And again, that was the person in charge of sawing all the logs. They aimed to disrupt the operation at its core. So the decision to deputize Sawyer was a calculated risk, one that hinged on the hope that the Sawyer's allegiance to the law would supersede his loyalty to Wright. Now, the uncertainty of the outcome, coupled with the potential for confrontation, underscored the gravity of the situation and the lengths to which Marshall was willing to go to enforce the law. Now, as the two men set out on their journey back to the mill, the afternoon sun cast shadows on the road, mirroring the uncertainty that lay ahead. The plan they had crafted was a testament to their resourcefulness and determination, but it also highlighted the complexities of law enforcement in a time when community ties could either bolster or hinder the pursuit of justice. The story of Deputy Marshall and Dr. Thurber is just a snapshot of a bygone era when the American frontier, basically was on a balance between the Old West and everything that was coming, industrialization and all that other stuff. So 1890, it was an interesting time, 1889. And like I mentioned before, this was one of those situations where you have a mill owner who doesn't want to pay his taxes. You have a community who's basically employed by that mill owner. So you don't really get the opportunity to have it both ways. You can't get the support of the people that live in the community, because if they support what you're trying to enforce, then you are going to put all those people in jeopardy of losing their positions. But I will say what C.T. Wright, aka Charlie Wright, did in response to this approach of Marshall and Thurber definitely was more dangerous and put their jobs in jeopardy much more so than just following the regular old tax law. But again, this was the late 1800s, and tax law was definitely not the most well-known thing, but it was still there, and you still had to pay your taxes. So at the end of that day, don't go killing people. So I'm going to go ahead and read directly right here from Wakefield's piece, because Larry Wakefield is a legend in northern Michigan, and it would do him an injustice by not reading his words word for word. So I'm going to go, and this is part 2, middle of the way through part 2 of his 4-part series. I'm probably only going to cover the first 2 parts because of COVID, and I will get you the next 2 parts next Friday when I am up and running at 100%. because, as you can tell, I am struggling today, and it has not been the best. Between regular work and doing the podcast, it definitely can take a bit out of you. So, I mentioned I'm going to read from Larry Wakefield's piece, and here we go. Quote, "Meanwhile, Charlie Wright, who had been hitting the bottle all morning, walking the streets with a loaded gun, and declaring he would roll the logs over dead men if necessary, had returned to the mill and was chatting with his blacksmith, Wilson Reed. Quote, 'Pays to have some sand,' said Wright with some satisfaction. 'Yes,' Reed said. 'Sand is in all the right places.' Then, looking out the door, Reed Mill had a rifle over to the right. He saw 2 men approaching, and the bridge over Otter Creek. He said, 'Who is that?' Outside, someone said, 'Here they come.' Quote, 'Let them come,' said Wright, as he picked up the rifle from behind the door and hurried down to the bridge. Only 2 men, an Ottawa Indian named Joseph, a Pamagishik, and a Swede named Charlie Anderson observed what happened next at close range. They were piling lumber near the bridge. Wright met Marshall and Thurber just south of the bridge and walked beside them. Talking loudly, the 2 workmen could not hear the words over the noise. And then Wright jumped in front of Marshall and raised his rifle. The big man reached for the gun and grasped just below the muzzle. Wright jerked the rifle out of Marshall's grasp and shot him through the chest, just below the heart. Marshall staggered, loudly groaned, and fell face downward in the dust. Thurber cried a pace or 2 behind Marshall. Quote, my God, what has he done?" Then he leaped forward and grabbed the gun while Wright tried to lever in another shell. The 2 men were locked in a death struggle, fighting for the rifle, swaying from side to side with the gun pointed up over their heads. They back along the road. Just before they reached the bridge, some 30 feet from where Marshall's body lay, Wright put one arm around Thurber's neck, drawing him close to his chest. With the other hand, he took a pistol from his right hip pocket, put the muzzle to Thurber's ear, and pulled the trigger. Thurber released his hold on the rifle and fell dead. Wright walked over to the Pamagish and asked him if he had seen what happened. The Indian, badly frightened, nodded his head. Wright told him to say nothing about it, and the Indian nodded again. Then Wright walked a short distance from the road and sat down on a scantling. While he was sitting there, Newman Clark, one of his teamsters, came and sat down beside him. Wright remarked that it seemed to be getting more relaxed. Clark asked if he could have some money, and Wright said, "My God, Clark, can't you wait until this excitement dies down?" But Clark was gently insistent, and the 2 men walked down to the company store where Wright had his check, and Wright made out a check for Clark's wages. His bookkeeper and brother-in-law, Fred Crossett, asked Wright what had happened. Quote, "Oh, those 2 crazy fools pitched into me, and I had to shoot them. I feel sorry for them and their families, but they couldn't have done what they did. A man has to protect his property." Wright stayed around the mill and store until 6 o'clock, paying off his men. Then he disappeared into the woods. Meanwhile, someone had covered each body in the road with an umbrella to shield them from the hot sun. The bodies were brought in and laid in planks on one of the sheds at the cursory examination was made, and it was discovered that there was a flesh wound about 1.5 inches long on Thurber's chest. The rifle bullet, after passing through Marshall's body, had inflicted this minor wound on Thurber. It was around 4:30 that the telegram was sent to Errol to the sheriff's case in Benzonia. It merely noted that the mill had some trouble. Half an hour later, a second telegram arrived saying that Marshall and Thurber had been shot and killed, and warning the sheriff and prosecutor to tell Koval not to come alone as they might be waylaid and killed. This galvanized the sheriff into action. He telegraphed his deputy in Frankfurt to secure a boat, deputized 20 men, and await his coming. Then, with a fast team and accompanied by Koval and a reporter from the Benzie, he covered the 7 miles between Benzonia and Frankfurt in record time. He and his posse of deputies boarded the steamer Dover and reached Errol 20 miles north at 10 p.m., just as the summer sun was setting behind Lake Michigan and a full moon had risen. In the meantime, news of the killings had spread like wildfire all over the county, and men had been coming to the town of Errol on horseback and afoot, and there was much talk of lynching. Upon the arrival of Case and his men, a search was made of all houses, mill buildings, and the Seymour tied up at the dock. But Wright was nowhere to be found. And on that note, we are going to leave this week's story at that point. Because at this moment, we have Charlie Wright running for his life because he just murdered 2 men in cold blood as they confronted him about his unpaid taxes. This is a very interesting story, and it's a reminder that we have always been in the midst of a struggle between the government and the working class people, the owners of the mills, the owners of these large corporations. These are situations that have gone on for eternity. And in capitalism and in a capitalist society such as America, this will continue to go on and on for as long as this grand experiment exists. So this is just a taste of what the 1880s and early 1890s had. But there is a conclusion to this story that will be coming up next week when I have part 2 of Who Killed Frank Thurber. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I again apologize for my voice and my lack of significant pronunciation because of the fact that I have COVID brain and it is awful. I hate it. But just a reminder that it's still out there. So if you're sick, stay inside. Don't spread the illness. And as a reminder, I try to do my best and drop new episodes every Friday, but life happens sometimes. If you are interested in following me on social, I am no longer posting on X. I am 100% at Bill Huffman, that's all one word, .bsky.social. So that's Blue Sky. If you haven't started an account, please do. We grow about 1 million users a day, and it's an incredibly peaceful place to be when you compare it to the cesspool that became Twitter. And we can only thank one Elon Musk, and yes, I said Leon. He is what he is. Think of him what you will. But he had ruined and did ruin a product that I found extremely useful for a number of years. And that was until he bought it and allowed all of those blocked accounts, all of the banned accounts, all of the suspended white supremacists, Nazis, everybody let back in to the town square to have a peaceful discussion. Well, I don't think that was very peaceful, and in fact, it interrupted my life considerably because, you know, when you have a bunch of Nazis on a freaking social media app and they're talking a bunch of crap about this, that, and the other, and half of them are Russian bots, well, you know, it's time to look for bluer skies or greener pastures. And luckily, I am here to tell you that Blue Sky will make you feel like it is Twitter in the late 2010s. I would say it is definitely worth a look. It's a place you can find all of your friends, the same exact layout as the old Twitter, and you won't be inundated with a bunch of crap from the people out there that just want to cause trouble, because as they say in Batman, some people just want to see the world burn. And on that note, until next time, stay healthy, and most importantly, be safe.
Something is creeping in, don't follow it down.
Let me introduce you to Barry Clew, an authorised financial advisor from New Zealand and a very special kind of stain on humanity.
He was a very knowledgeable young guy.
He was a registered financial advisor.
Type of guy that was bending over backwards to help you.
Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that Barry sounds like a great guy, and you'd be right. Well, right up until the point when you're wrong.
It was all fictitious.
You stole from my son who has a disability.
Chris never knew. He died believing that we're all taken care of.
A psychopath is somebody who lacks empathy, acts impulsively. I think there's a strong case that Barry might be all of those things, actually.
To find out how Barry Clew stole over $15 million from 81 victims, subscribe to Clueless, the long con. That's Clueless, spelt Klooghless.
Online education is convenient, but sometimes it can be lonely. Sometimes the extra help you need can only come from someone else. At American Public University, we make online education personalized, affordable, and memorable. With 24/7 mental health support available in multiple languages, access to career coaches, and lifelong career services, you'll never feel alone on your path to success. American Public University. Digital by nature, human by design.